So welcome everyone to the Digital InfoDay Session. This webinar will be taking a look at psychological well-being and how this can be impacted by myeloma. We'll be also looking at ways to cope with some of the issues that can occur. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch on our Facebook page, but it will also be available on our website soon after. The format of this webinar is that there will be a presentation by our expert speaker, and there will be a section time for some Q&As at the end. During the webinar, if you would like to chat to other participants, you can use the chat box. If you have some questions for our speaker, you can use the Q&A box. We will do our best to get through as many as possible at the end. You can also submit any questions that you have throughout in that Q&A box. And many thanks for those who have already submitted some questions. We'll definitely be touching on them at the end. So I think overall for us as an organisation, we rely heavily on the generosity and kindness of all our supporters and fundraisers. Myeloma UK does not receive any government funding, so your support is vital. We are very thankful for all the contributions, as this allows us to continue to support patients and their family and friends. So I think overall, I suppose I can start by introducing myself. Some of you may recognize the voice. My name is Sarah, and I'm one of the myeloma information specialists that answers the info line and also the Ask the Nurse service. I think tonight's topic is very close to my heart because my background is in psychology. And it's definitely a resource that I feel is very important and relevant for family and patients. So it's great to have our speaker here tonight. So first, I would like to welcome this evening's expert, Sarabi. She is a psychotherapist at the Department of Haematology at King's Hospital, London. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Sarabi. I'm sure it'll be a really, really helpful presentation.
Pleasure to be here, Sarah, and thanks to Myeloma UK too for inviting me to be part of this conversation. Shall we get started now?
Yeah, go for it.
So hello to everyone who's listening. Could we just go back a slide, please, if that's all right? As Sarah said, I work at King's College Hospital in London, and I specialize in supporting patients and families affected by any type of blood cancer or disease of the bone marrow. Some of what I'll say today is specific to having myeloma, but some of it is principle for general psychological well-being that could apply to anyone who's listening. I'll speak, as Sarah said, for about 20-25 minutes or so, and then I look forward to taking some of your questions. Can we go to the next slide, please? So before I begin, I want to acknowledge that everyone who's listening might be at a different stage with their illness. They might be a family member or a carer rather than a patient. They might have active disease requiring treatment, or they might have smoldering disease, or people might have undergone different lines of treatment already. So I want to say that because I want to emphasize that I'm going to touch on themes related to mental health and well-being that will hopefully be beneficial to everyone. But please take what resonates for you and leave what doesn't, because not all of it might apply to everyone. Can we move on, please? Thank you. So from supporting patients and families affected by myeloma over the years, the things that stand out are concerns about loss and change and living with uncertainty. Those are the biggest sort of things that impact our psychological or emotional well-being. A new diagnosis of any critical illness like myeloma can feel a little bit like having the rug pulled out from underneath you. The psychological term for this, which you see on the slide, is loss of our assumptive world, which is basically the gap between what we thought or hoped our life would look like and what it actually looks like. And this loss can feel like a real grief when we experience it, because for a period of time, the sense of safety and predictability we had taken for granted gets shaken up. We might not even know that we had certain assumptions about what our life was going to be like until they get challenged by something like a critical illness or a relapse, indeed. The sorts of assumptions that I'm talking about here are that life is safe or life is predictable, that life has some kind of order or meaning to it. And when you get a diagnosis or when something happens that critically changes the direction of the condition you're living with, then it can feel like nothing is certain. It can feel like suddenly everything is unsafe, and it can also feel like there's no meaning or sense to any of it. And this is a very difficult transition for us as human beings because we like certainty and we all need safety and predictability. It's what keeps us going. And this loss can also happen at multiple levels at the same time. For example, you might have a loss or a change in how your daily physical condition changes as a result of having the illness or having treatment, as well as broader losses like what the future might look like or what you had hoped might happen. Next slide, please. So adjustment then is really about trying to find some sort of solid ground again by making sense of what's happening to me and developing a new set of beliefs within which we then try to live as well as we can. The good thing is that psychological research shows that as much as these assumptions or beliefs can get shaken up, they're not completely shattered, and we can learn to create some kind of meaning and order out of that chaos. And while we do this, of course, distressing emotions are completely normal and valid. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So this is just an illustration. Some of it may be painful to read of what the period of adjustment can be like. And this could be at any point during your treatment when something has to change, or when you have a relapse, or when you're just starting to need treatment again. And all types of distressing emotions like fear, sadness, worries, stress, anxiety, irritability, even anger, they're all completely normal and natural to experience at this time. They can all be viewed as emotions we might experience when we are forced to adjust to something that's really significant, something that's very important, and changes our current status, whether it's our current emotional status or current physical status, from what we've got used to. And so the first thing I always like to emphasize is that distress and painful feelings are all entirely valid, even though people might not be used to experiencing them before something like this happens. Next slide, please. So coping with any kind of loss or chronic type of sorrow can involve oscillating between confronting the loss and just trying to move forward with your life. And although this dual process model of grief was developed in relation to bereavement or grief after we lose someone we love, it can also apply to other types of losses. And I'm sharing it here today because this is what living with a disease like myeloma can feel like. You might have moments when you're more in touch with how much the disease has forced you to change, or all the losses that it has resulted in. And you might have other moments when you're able to put aside the fact that you might be ill. You know, you might be able to get absorbed in something and momentarily distract yourself from the complete and full awareness of all the losses you've had to live with. And it's completely natural for your everyday life experience to go kind of zigzagging between the two. That's entirely valid and understandable. Can we have the next slide, please?
So Robbie, just quickly there, is there any chance you could move the mic slightly away from your mouth? Or,
sorry, is that better?
It's perfect. Most of the time it's perfect. It's just
Would you like me to, is there anything you'd like me to sort of say again as part of that?
No, I think it's perfect. It's just a slight little feedback, but now
sure.
Don't worry.
Sure, thanks for letting me know. No so for me, psychological well-being always starts with emotional awareness. When we think of certain types of feelings, particularly emotions like sadness, fear, or anxiety, the ones that don't feel good, they're viewed as bad or negative in some way. And then we struggle with them, and then we feel ashamed for having them, or we just want to push them aside. But actually, it helps to look at them as being as valid as some of the happier emotions we might have, and they have as much of a right to exist as some of our other feelings. None of these emotions feel good when we're in the middle of experiencing them, but they all serve some kind of purpose and can hold important clues to help us understand ourselves better or help us understand the situation a bit better. For example, if we look at anxiety, no, it's an unpleasant emotional state. We all experience anxiety from time to time. And it's an emotional state we're biologically programmed to experience whenever we're facing some kind of threat. Now, this threat might be an external one, like if there were to be a spider that comes into this room, they make me anxious, so I would experience anxiety. Or if it might be an internal threat, by which I mean it might just be a thought that my mind has about something that could happen in the future. And anxiety is our mind and body's way of saying, I'm scared, I don't like this, and I want to escape this situation. And immediately our instinctive response is to fix it, to try and make it stop, or to push it aside. And this can lead to us avoiding activities or avoiding certain things just because we're scared of facing it and we want it to stop. And then if that persists, we can then get into the cycle where we develop a fear of fear itself. And it can become really a sort of vicious circle we get trapped in. But thinking about anxiety slightly differently can maybe stop that from happening. So for example, if we think about anxiety as a necessary emotion that keeps us safe from harm, but because it's so necessary for our survival, it's also very, very sensitive. By which I mean this alarm system in our heads can get triggered very easily with our own thoughts. Because the one thing our mind is very good at doing is it's a very good storyteller and it's a very good time traveler. It sort of forces us to go back into the past or far into the future and face things that haven't happened yet. And I can easily get caught up in thoughts or ideas that my mind generates. And when that happens, I can start to feel all the emotions of stress and anger and fear in this moment, even though in this moment, nothing might have changed in my material world in a practical sort of sense. So responding to it in a helpful way might involve recognizing what's happening, doing a quick check of whether I'm responding to an external threat or whether I'm responding to an internal threat that my mind has brought up for me, trying to calm myself in the present moment, trying to address the source of the fear. And over the course of the talk, I hope to touch on some of the ways we can learn to do that. Is the sound coming through okay now, Sarah?
Yes, there is still a tiny little bit of feedback just on the mic. If you can move it slightly away from your, but to be honest, it's really quite minimal. It's not too bad for me.
Do you think that's a bit better?
Maybe.
Maybe that? Sorry, yeah. I'm having to fiddle around with it quite a bit.
No, I can understand. No, that's all good. That's a lot better there, Sarah.
Fantastic. Could we have the next slide, please? So there can be a perception among people that coping well with something like myeloma is this perfect idea of somebody who's smiling all the time, smiling through their challenges, always confident, soldiering on, never has a bad moment. Can I just ask you to move on to the next slide? But this is in reality what coping looks more like, what even good coping looks like, because it includes all these ups and downs. It includes, feelings of shock. It might include feelings of hope. It might then include moments of hopelessness or despair. It might include moments of joy or gratitude for the care you're receiving. It might then include feelings of sadness or withdrawal and silence where you don't want to engage with the world. So all of this is actually a part of healthy and normal coping with something like this. Of course, some people can experience more persistent problems, which can then interfere with this up and down, and people then stay down for a much longer period of time. But the up and down roller coaster is actually as uncomfortable as it feels. It's a normal picture of what good coping looks like. And I hope to share some perspectives or strategies that I think can be helpful with coping with both difficult emotional states, as well as trying to live well within the unknown and with uncertainty. Can we have the next slide, please? So step one is to acknowledge your emotions. As I've said on the slide there, running away from our feelings makes them have a stronger hold on us. I've rarely met someone who has successfully managed to push a feeling aside for it not to resurface and come back in some form. So simply developing a greater emotional awareness and an acceptance of our distressing emotions can change how we experience them. Not everyone, but some people really struggle when a difficult feeling shows up, and we really feel frustrated, and we want to push it away as soon as possible. We might also feel frustrated at ourselves that we're having these emotions in the first place. Instead, there's a lot of evidence from the world of psychology to suggest that if we can learn to name what we're feeling and tell ourselves that it's okay that I'm having this emotion, it doesn't mean anything about me, it sets us up very differently to both deal with the feeling as well as try to shift it. Because it might be a feeling that you want to shift, but if we start off from a position of just openly recognizing that it's there, we're in a better position to be able to engage with it in a constructive way. So when you feel sad or anxious or angry, try to breathe and just say to yourself, I'm feeling sad at the moment and it's okay for me to feel like this, or I'm feeling really angry, or I'm feeling like all of this is really unfair and it's okay for me to have this feeling. That doesn't mean that you always react from a position of that feeling or that you kind of act in a way that makes that feeling stronger, but there is no harm and actually quite a bit of good in potentially just validating how you're feeling at any given moment, even if it's just to yourself. Next slide, please. So, you know, if this were an event taking place in person, I would do a quick show of hands to ask which one of us has ever thought about something beyond the point at which it was necessary or useful. I can certainly say that I have. In fact, just today I must have done that 5 or 6 times. So that's just a humorous way of recognizing that it's very human for us to do this. Next slide, please. So, and I suspect the feeling of worry or stress is probably very familiar to a lot of people who are listening today. In certain doses, worry can actually be really healthy and helpful because it highlights us, it shows us what's important to us. It shows us what's maybe a little bit unresolved. It shows us what's a problem that we might need to look at and solve or prepare for. And so up to a point, worry and even stress makes us good problem solvers. Because problem solving is what our mind is very good at. It likes problem solving. And again, problem solving, of course, is very necessary for our survival and our day-to-day functioning. But beyond a point, worry can become unhelpful. Like many things, it works in moderation, but beyond a point, it's not helpful. When this happens, it can become counterproductive, where we tend to ruminate. Rumination is essentially when you go over the problem repeatedly in your mind without actually being able to generate any solutions for it. Or we might shut down and avoid confronting the issue because it's so overwhelming that we can't look at it. Or sometimes we experience it as the mind asking lots of what if questions without, again, generating any answers, you know, like what if something goes wrong? What if I can't get there in time? What if the internet fails today? What if my sound fails today? What if somebody comes and disturbs me in this office? This kind of process is very common because the mind likes to generate and solve problems. So it looks for anything that could go wrong and tries to anticipate all the hurdles that could arise. So if you find your mind stuck on a particular cause of worry or stress, trying to engage with it and trying to generate an answer can be helpful. So if I'm sitting here going, what if my internet goes? Rather than going into a state of panic by not attempting to answer the question, if I just allow myself to think of what I would do, I can easily come up with solutions like, okay, I'll probably call Sarah and tell her what's happened. I'll then try and log in from my phone, or I'll try and restart my computer. So sometimes if we engage with the worry before it gets too overwhelming, we might be able to generate answers. You can also ask yourself, what can I do about it now? So for example, if you can think of things you can do in the present to plan for or prepare for a situation that you're worried about in the future, then it's always a good idea to try and put that into action, or just make a list of what you can do to try and prepare for that future scenario and set an intention, or just make a commitment to yourself that you're going to address it maybe the next day. Finally, the third thing that can be helpful is asking, like it says on the third bullet point there, how does that question change how I need to live today? Because a lot of the time, this helps filter out the constructive type of worry from the more unhelpful rumination. For example, a lot of the people I support or work with have worries about what the side effects of a future treatment will be like. Now, this is a question that only time can answer. Obviously, you can get information from your treating team, but what your experience of it is going to be like, there's no way to know that right now. So asking the question of, okay, how does that question change how I need to live my life today, can help us put that question aside until we actually have to confront that situation. Could we move on, please? The third step is recognizing that to counter this sort of problem-solving, analytical thinking mode of the mind, we have something we might also call the sensing mode. Now, the sensing mode is about using our senses, whether it's sight, sound, touch, taste, or smell, to engage with and notice what's around us in the here and now. Because a lot of anxiety is about time traveling into the future, and a lot of low mood or depression or regret is about time traveling into the past. So engaging with our senses, with what's around us right now, can soothe and calm a mind that's really frantic and frazzled. Now, the important thing is that you find a soothing activity that works for you. And like I've said on there are many people, the first thing they say when they hear about meditation is meditation doesn't work for me. That's okay. It doesn't have to. It works for some people. It doesn't work for other people. Some people might want a more active type of soothing activity like coloring. There are these great adult coloring books that are available now. I personally quite like them because it's a way of shutting down while also doing something. Or it might be engaging with a hobby like gardening or carpentry. Any activity that basically gives your thinking mind a break and helps you get completely absorbed in a very embodied, sensory way with what you're doing in that moment. It could also really be 2 minutes of sitting with a cup of tea and savoring it. This idea of savoring is the appreciation for the little things around you in the present moment. Even if you've had a really tough day, if somebody brings you a cup of coffee and it tastes really good and they've got it right, try and savor that. Even if it takes a minute, that has benefits for soothing and balancing out that frantic, frazzled, stressed part of the mind. Could we go on to the next slide, please? So if we can basically think about these as two different gears in which we can operate. Neither is right or wrong. It's really important to stress that. The doing mode is very important for our survival, the planning and the analyzing and being goal-oriented. It's so important to be able to just function in the world. But it's also our default mode. It's the mode that we'll go into when we're not thinking. The being mode or the sensing mode is sort of a gear we can consciously step into when we feel like we need to slow down a little bit. And the difference between that is there's no specific goal there. It's just about present moment awareness. Some people call that mindfulness. So mindfulness is just another word for present moment awareness, where we're not using our brain so much, we're using our senses to engage with what's happening around us. And hopefully after this presentation, some people will just remember that there's this other gear I have. I don't always have to be going on the doing, thinking mode. And I can use my senses a little bit more to try and calm myself and give myself some soothing strategies. Can we move on, please? Step 4 is, and again, this is something I think that applies to all of us. I've not met somebody who doesn't have an inner critic. We all have that voice in the back of our mind that's our biggest bully, that beats us down sometimes when we may not deserve it. The voice that says, you're useless when you're not able to walk more than 1 mile without resting, or if you're not able to work, or the voice that says you're not doing anything useful when you're just having a rest on the sofa after having a tough day of chemotherapy, or the one that says, what are you complaining about? People have it so much worse than you do. So we all have this critic. So it's important to listen out for it, but not listen to it. Recognizing that it's something that exists in all of us. Instead, try to show yourself some compassion and kindness. Now, this isn't easy for many of us to do. We all treat other people better than we treat ourselves. But there are simple ways of practicing self-compassion and cultivating it as a skill. One of the ways to do it is to ask yourself, would I say this, whatever my inner critic is saying to me, and I'm listening to it, would I say this to a friend or family member that I really loved and cared about? And if you wouldn't say it to them, then don't say it to yourself either. Try to actually talk to yourself the way you might talk to somebody you really care about. It might feel awkward or weird to do this, but I do believe that it's a very powerful tool, and it enhances well-being. If you tried that, you'd probably come up with supportive statements like, you've been through a lot, or you've had a really tough day, or it's really okay to rest. None of this is your fault. Or you might say that, you're just trying to do your best in a really difficult situation. Now, the reason you'd probably come up with these is because you know instinctively, you know what somebody who's in pain, somebody who's hurting needs to hear. So give yourself the same gift of those kind of supportive, loving statements, because again, it's something that's common to all of us as human beings. We all need love. We all need kindness when we're hurting. Could we move on to the next slide, please? The fifth technique is something about finding an ACE, which is an acronym for achievement, connection, or enjoyment. Now, there's a lot of evidence, again, from the world of psychological research that if we can find ways of giving ourselves one of these three things, it can balance out distress we might be feeling. And the important thing to remember is that no activity is too small to count. So, for example, achievement could mean that you went for a short walk around the block or you helped with the dishes. Enjoyment could mean that you sent a text to a friend asking them to chat or come over and watch a film. Obviously, this is not only when it's safe to do so, not during a pandemic. It could also mean that you just had a chat to a family member or a friend on the phone. Maybe you had a chat about something that wasn't related to the myeloma or to your anxiety. And it may be that you're living with the loss and grief of very real ways in which the disease or the treatment has changed you. Maybe you're living with the loss of not being able to do a lot of the physical activities you could do before, or not being able to do many of the things you used to be able to do before. While acknowledging them, like I said, it's important to validate and say that this is a very real grief that you're experiencing. Can you also try and find a modified way of doing that activity? So for example, if you're a parent and you have young kids and you used to go to the park and kick the ball around with them, it can be hugely upsetting and painful if you're not able to do that. But sometimes we can get so steeped in that loss that we don't manage to do something that may be the next best thing, like, you know, going to the park with them, letting them kick the ball around and you cheer them on from the sidelines. So it's about trying to balance out the loss with what can I do? What's still available to me as a modified version of finding either achievement, connection with others, or some fun or enjoyment or recreation of some kind. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So the sixth strategy is something about connecting with your values. Now, values, I don't mean this in a moral sense at all. From the world of psychology, we refer to values as personal qualities we want to show in our day-to-day life. And they're different from goals in that they're not things you can tick off a to-do list. They're more about ongoing action. How do I want to be on an ongoing basis? How do I want to come across to other people on an ongoing basis? So while goals might include things like go for a 2-mile walk or finish that project I was working on, values will include things like looking after myself or being reliable or being friendly or being loving, which is an ongoing process of what are the qualities I want to show. A useful way of that I think about values is, you know, what do I want people to say about me after I've left the room? How do I want people to think of me in terms of how I am with them? And again, research shows that if we're able to connect with our values, we can find meaning and purpose even in the most difficult of times. And even a small step in the direction of the personal qualities that we actually want to embody and show to other people can enliven us and make us feel like our life is a bit richer for it. Sometimes our thoughts, feelings, or urges can hijack us away from our values and make us behave in ways that are not us or are not what we want to be. It's okay to become aware of that. We all do this as human beings. We get pulled away and hooked by all kinds of negative thoughts or unhelpful content from our mind. But it's useful to recognize that we all have a choice to make, to either be led by our values or by our changing moods or urges or feelings in any given moment. So, for example, if being fit and physically healthy is one of mine, you know, every morning I face a choice. I can either get up early and do something in the service of that value, like do a little bit of yoga or a little bit of exercise, or I can give into that automatic thought that I have almost every single day, which says, it's okay, leave it, have a lion, you know, just stay in bed. So those are the kind of small choice points we all have, where we can either choose to let our values guide us, or we can be guided by our emotions and moods and thoughts, which are constantly changing. Or if being loving is a value that's important to me, then I might try and consciously show an affectionate gesture towards people who are close to me, even if I'd had a really terrible day. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that doing what matters to us, even a small thing, a small gesture that serves a value that's important to us, can go a long way towards making us feel not only a little bit more well emotionally, but also makes us feel a little bit more in control. Can we move on to the next slide, please? The seventh sort of coping strategy I thought of and wanted to share was something about where are you shining the spotlight. And by spotlight, I mean, what part of the story are you focusing on? We are all living the story of our life, and we're constantly telling our story of life, either to ourselves or to other people. Now, is it on what's happening to me, which isn't in my control, or is it on how I'm dealing with it? Because sometimes we can get really absorbed on how life has messed us about and how unfair everything feels. And that's not right or wrong. I mean, it might be true, but actually looking at how we've adapted and are trying to do our best at a difficult time can help more than focusing on what's happened to me. Again, there's no right or wrong at all in which part you focus on, but the part you focus on is going to influence your mood in any given moment. And there is something about connecting to your own resilience by looking at how have you tried to get on with things, to put one foot in front of the other despite everything you've been through, and how are you continuing to do that? You're still here despite everything that's happened. You're adapting and you're changing. This can really help us connect to a sense of our own self-efficacy, or our ability to be in the driver's seat of our life, even when a lot of it isn't in our control. Just something to bear in mind. It can also help with our self-esteem, focusing on how we are dealing with something that's happening to us rather than what's actually happening to us. Can we move on to the next slide, please? This sort of builds on what I've said before. Everyone who's listening will know that uncertainty can be one of the most difficult things to accept in general, but especially when you have a condition like myeloma. But learning to be okay with not knowing, or introducing that you don't have to know everything, can be really helpful. Because if we fail to do that, if we don't try and sort of make friends with not knowing, we'll either try to impose a very positive reality on the situation, or a positive perspective which might not be realistic, or it'll be an unnecessarily pessimistic one, which will create unnecessary suffering. So a balanced position of, I understand what I've been told, I understand what might happen, I can try and prepare for it as best as I can, but there are limits to what I can know, and there are limits to what I can do about it, can be helpful. I'm sure everyone also knows somebody, or might be somebody, who says, I don't like not being in control. Nobody likes not being in control. It's part of us as human beings. We don't like it when we feel like something's out of our hands. But actually, if we remain attached to this self-concept, if we remain attached to this idea that I'm not somebody who likes not being in control, we'll really struggle when we come across situations when our lack of control becomes very apparent or obvious. So one thing I like to think about for myself, and which I think might be helpful to those listening, is control is never an all or nothing thing. In almost any given situation, there'll be bits that you can control and bits that you can't control. Even the best laid plans have an element of unpredictability. So in any situation, try and look out for what is actually in your hands. Could we move on to the next slide, please? Because it's related to this point. So I've put two circles in there, things that are within my sphere of control and things that are not. And again, some of these things that I've put on there might be a little bit difficult to read, but this is true of all of us. This is not just specific to people with myeloma or people supporting people who have myeloma, but this is the human condition, that there are certain things that are in my hands and certain things that are not. So instead of focusing on controlling things, focusing on my ability to adapt to changes is more helpful. Because, when things are going well for us, we can all fall into the trap of thinking that we're in charge and that's why things are going well for us. But actually, there are times when every human being's life, no matter what your age or circumstances, when something must have happened that you didn't anticipate, even before you were diagnosed, something must have happened that you didn't anticipate or prepare for in advance. And yet you probably managed to adapt your way out of it or adapt your way through it. Even if it didn't feel good and you didn't like having to do that, the fact is we all have to adapt. And if you're here today, I believe all of you have an element of being good at adapting to change. So this way we can arrive at a position where rather than wanting to be in control, we're able to say, okay, I'm not fully in control, but I'm okay with that. I know what I can control and I know what I can't. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So just the final thing I'll say about that is to seek help if you want it. It's very important to do that. If you're already under the care of somebody for mental health difficulties, then it's very important to continue with that and to let them know that you also have this diagnosis and this additional stressor in your life. If you're taking any medication for your mental health, it's really important to let your hematology team know about that, just because certain medications can interact with certain types of chemotherapy. There are some medications that form a part of myeloma treatment for many people, especially steroids, which are known to generate mood changes in certain people or exacerbate existing mood-related problems. So especially feelings like anger and anxiety or irritability. So it's very important to tell your hematology team about any sudden changes in your mood or in your psychological state so that they can care for you in a holistic manner. In terms of psychological therapy or counseling, there are several possible routes of accessing this. At the end of the presentation, I think Myeloma UK will remind everyone of what resources are available through them. There are also voluntary sector organizations like Macmillan's or Maggie's who provide counseling services to people affected by cancer. Everyone's different, so not everyone needs or uses counseling, but if you feel like it would be useful to you, don't hesitate to ask for it and access it. You might only need 1 or 2 sessions, or you might need more long-term support. The best support is the one that's tailored to what you need at any given moment, especially with a condition like myeloma. You might need support at different points in the course of your journey within the illness. So don't hesitate to ask for support if you need it. I think that's where I finish, and I look forward to questions now, Sarah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Sarabi. It was so good. Definitely from myself, my experience on the Infoline Ask the Nurse services, essentially everything that you have touched upon is something that we hear day to day. You could even start a conversation about, they want to know information about drugs, but this will all interflow. So it's such a great resource and something that I'm sure lots of people have found helpful this evening. But I suppose we could start with some questions. So I have our first one here, which is again touching on what you've previously said around uncertainty. But this one is from Jane. I'm finding it hard to keep positive about my myeloma. It is so difficult not to think about the uncertainty of it all the time.
Yeah, thanks, Jane, for this question. I think we all have a complicated relationship with the phrase being positive. I personally am not a big fan of it, only because I sometimes feel like saying to someone, what does it mean when they say, Jane, when you say, I'm finding it hard to keep positive about my myeloma, and where's that expectation coming from for you that you have to do that? Is it self-imposed? Is it coming maybe from other people? Is it coming from a societal pressure that says one should be positive about everything all the time and that makes it easier to cope? Often there's a lot of pressure about being positive, and I personally don't think that that's healthy or helpful. If being positive means never becoming upset or having distressing feelings, then like I said in my talk, that's probably not realistic, and nor is it necessary in order to cope well with something. Distress like sadness, fear, anxiety are all healthy responses to having myeloma. And if that goes against your idea of being positive, so be it. It's completely understandable and normal if you're struggling to access a sort of broad positivity that everything will be fine. Again, that might not be accessible to you. It might not even be realistic. But often our anxieties and fears reside in the unknown future. As your question says, Jane, it's about the uncertainty. So actively refocusing your attention on what you do know and what you have now can be helpful, because that's certain. So when you're faced with all this uncertainty about what might happen, looking around and seeing, okay, what do I know right now for sure? And who do I have around me right now for sure? Or what do I have around me right now for sure can be really grounding when we feel, because anxiety makes us feel a little bit like a balloon floating in the air, just asking that question of what do I have around me right now? What do I know? It's almost like you've added a little weight at the bottom of that balloon string, which keeps it down, keeps it from flying away. And thirdly, I wonder if it can be helpful to shift the focus from what we feel positive about. So it might not be possible to feel positive about having myeloma, but could you generate a feeling of positivity about how you're confronting this challenge that you didn't ask for? Could you generate a feeling of positivity over small actions you take on a day-to-day basis to help yourself, however insignificant they might feel, with whatever you can control? So focusing on making positive or helpful choices can be less daunting than trying to find some broad sense of positivity in the whole situation. I hope that's helpful. That's all I can offer there. Something about making positive and helpful choices rather than feeling positive about the situation.
And I think definitely what you touched upon there, the expectations of feeling positive, and if you're not, therefore you're failing. Myeloma is a very difficult, type of cancer. You have every right to feel upset, sad, frustrated, all of those things.
Absolutely.
And, that's really important, that, like you said, validate that. And I suppose as well, Sarabi, just in regards to validating your own experience, maybe for family members in conversations with patients, that they don't need to come up with answers to the questions. You could be just simply validating that person's emotions in that moment.
That's such an important point, Sarah. And yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Sometimes our family or loved ones will step in with a solution or step in with something like, oh, just be positive. Partly because they don't know what else to say, and partly because they find it difficult to stay with that feeling of anxiety or sadness. But to anyone listening, it's so much better to say, it's totally understandable you feel like that. You might even say, I feel scared as well. That we're feeling this feeling together, and neither of us has to find a way to fix it. There's also one thing I'd like to say categorically. There's still a lot of myths around the fact that being positive, has better outcomes for cancer treatment. That has not been proven to be correct at all. Being positive might feel good, and it might help us make more helpful choices. So that should be the focus rather than feeling positive emotions all the time, because there's no link proven between that and what your outcomes from treatment are. Because it's certainly something that generates this expectation in people's mind.
Of course, and that's a really, really good point. I suppose we could start our next question. This I suppose, leads back to the uncertainty as well, but this one is from John. Why can we not get to know our life expectancy, what it is, without knowing this information makes it difficult? And this is something we get all the time as well on the info line. Life expectancy, I suppose they want the certainty when really there's no certain answer to this question.
Absolutely, John, and thank you for that. And again, we all find uncertainty difficult, and there are some unique challenges with living with a condition like myeloma, which makes it a little bit more difficult because of the very nature of the illness. I guess the first thought that I'm having about that is that while it's completely understandable, it's very human to seek certainty. Even if somebody could tell you what your life expectancy is, it would generate worries of a different kind. Because at the moment, all somebody can tell you is a broad aggregate based on other patients they've seen. It'll be a very rough estimate. And even within that, there'll be some uncertainty about what specifically is going to happen to me, Of course, the other side of that question is sometimes people want to know that because they might be feeling acutely anxious about the possibility that something's going to change very suddenly and very quickly for me. Now, that's a different type of worry, and you might be able to get some reassurances from your team on that. If you're concerned about something deteriorating very quickly, your team might be able to give you an idea of what to expect with your stage of the illness, with the treatment you're on, what to expect to happen. Which might address some of those types of concerns about something going wrong very quickly. But coming back to the broader point about uncertainty, and this goes back to something I said in response to the previous question as well, the best any of us can do when we're facing uncertainty is remind us of what is certain. Come back to what we know we have, come back to what we know now. And this serves the other purpose of also connecting us to what's important in the present. For some people that's family, for some people it might be a passion or a hobby, and for some people it might be work that you're doing at the moment, because that is happening in the present. You might also deal with uncertainty by asking, the future seems uncertain to me, but is there anything I can do right now to prepare for it a little bit better? Now, for some people, this might be taking care of practical things. It might be taking care of finances as best as you can, or it might, again, help refocus your attention on what matters to you, what's important to you, what do you want to spend your energy and your time on in the present. So asking that question can be helpful. Because, although our mind is very good at time traveling to the past and to the future, we are limited in that we can only enact and live in the present. So coming back to that question of what can I do can be helpful. And I'm also saying this so that it offers some comfort to people who are listening, but it's the nature of being human to not know what our future holds for us. And that's just amplified in the cases of having an illness like myeloma. So in some sense, we all have to find a way of putting one foot in front of the other, not knowing what might be around the corner. And that's where connecting with our values, living a life that's closest and most aligned to how we want to be in the world can be helpful.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So we have our next question. I'm worried about my family members who will not talk about their feelings. They bottle everything up. How can I help them? This is a tricky one.
Yeah. Now, it's completely valid and understandable that your family members will worry about you, because this affects everyone who is, within its general sphere of influence. So, I mean, perhaps the first thing to do is to share your worries with them in a gentle way. Sometimes it's helpful to just even say exactly what the person has said in the question, that if it's your partner or your parent or your child, you can say, sometimes I worry that you're bottling things up. That gives them an open invitation to, it opens up that dialogue for them to tell you whether that's the case or not. Now, it's quite natural actually for family members or loved ones to sometimes shield the patient from what they might be feeling, because they feel like they don't want to burden the patient and they want to protect the patient from any more pain or suffering. So it's quite natural that might happen. But just asking that question and saying, just being transparent and open and say, sometimes I worry that you're bottling your feelings up. I know that this must be difficult for you too. So, please feel free to talk to me about it. Or if you don't want to talk to me about it, then, talk to someone else about it. Talk to a friend or family member of your own about it. Or maybe you want to access some counseling. Putting those options on the table can be really helpful. It might also be helpful for them to know that you worry more when you don't know what's on their mind. So because while they might be bottling their feelings up to protect you, that's not the effect it's having. So again, being open about that can be helpful, and say that actually I worry more when I don't know what you're thinking. So it would be so much better if we could just talk openly about how each of us is feeling. Having said all that, at the same time, it's important to remember that everyone is different in how comfortable we are with confronting our feelings. And we don't want to push somebody too hard into opening up to us. Ultimately, from what I know as working as a psychotherapist, is people will open up when they're ready to. All we can do is let them know that it's okay to do so, give them permission to share how they're feeling without putting pressure on them to do that, because everyone also copes differently. What looks like bottling up feelings to me might genuinely be that somebody doesn't have much to say about it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I always like to remind family members or loved ones of people suffering with myeloma to have your own support network as well. You know, have your circle of friends or family members or a sibling that you can go to when things feel a little bit tough, in addition to, of course, professional services like counseling. Yeah.
Yeah, really helpful. And I think as well that can probably go back to the patients with your point of trying to protect their family members or their partner, when in reality they know them well enough that something's going on. So sometimes that transparency can really just open up and really just bring down the situation.
Absolutely.
Where you're probably just avoiding it to avoid those feelings. But in reality, if you actually flip it on its head, it's a lot helpful for everyone.
Because I mean, you know, the things we don't say hang in the air, you know, very heavily than sometimes the things we do say. The trick is to say them with love and say them with genuineness, which will automatically be there in a loving and supportive relationship. Yeah.
Completely agree. So our next question: I have pre-existing mental health issues before my myeloma diagnosis. Does having myeloma mean this will become worse, or should I let my hematology team know about this? You did touch on this previously in your presentation, which was really helpful. But if you want to make further comments.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think the person who's asking is asking about a very important aspect about, you know, there can be this real fear that if you used to suffer from something in the past, or that it's going to automatically become worse with this diagnosis. I personally always try to avoid thinking of people as being defined by their mental health difficulties. I always encourage my colleagues to do the same, because just because you have a diagnosis or had a diagnosis of depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder doesn't mean we can predict how you're going to cope with the myeloma. And so that wouldn't be fair at all if we were to do that. I don't think we can say with certainty that a pre-existing mental health problem is always exacerbated when somebody's diagnosed with myeloma on top of that. For some, the added stress can make things feel a little bit more difficult, but for others, that might not be the case. It depends on many different things. It depends on, you know, how long ago were your mental health challenges? How have you dealt with them? Do you have coping strategies that make you feel quite settled despite having mental health difficulties? Are they things that you're still struggling with in the present and getting help for? Were they related to some isolated life event which was a long time ago and you feel like that chapter is closed now? So ultimately, it's, you know, your mental health better than anyone on the outside can. So my advice would be that if you feel it's still an important part of the picture for you, then do tell your team about it. In addition to what I said earlier about, you know, if you're on any medication or if you're being looked after for mental health problems that interfere quite significantly with your ability to live your day-to-day life like you'd want to, then it's important that not only your hematology team knows about your mental health, but that your mental health support network knows about the myeloma, because you're a whole person. You're not just a set of different and disconnected labels and diagnoses. So everyone involved in your care might benefit from knowing a little bit about what else is going on that might be a source of stress. And yeah, that's all I'll say about it, really. It might also be that you thought that you had put something behind you, but actually you feel like those difficulties are resurfacing. Do tell your team about that. Might be the point at which you decide, actually, you know what, I think I'm going to tell my team about this. So having a flexible approach to this is best.
Agreed. So our next question, if the support that's been offered me doesn't help me, so what do I do?
Right.
Sorry, I'll repeat that question. So what do I do if the support that's being offered to me doesn't help me?
Right. I'm not sure whether the person means psychological support, since that's my area of expertise. I'm going to assume that that's the support they mean, or emotional support. As a client or a service user of any professional service, whether you're paying for it or whether it's on the NHS or whether it's provided by a charity, you have the right to tell the provider of that service whether it's working for you or not. So I believe this very much, that as a consumer or somebody who's accessing counseling or psychotherapy of any kind, please feel free to let your therapist or counselor know whether or not it's working for you in the way that you had hoped it would. You know, counselors and therapists are trained to hear that feedback and incorporate it into the way we support people. You could also contact the organization through which you're having the support if you feel uncomfortable speaking directly to the person who's providing it. You could also shop around a bit and see what other support is available. Equally, individual counseling or therapy isn't a good fit for many people. You might have wanted to give it a try on somebody's suggestion, but you find that actually that's not the model that's going to work for you. You might find that actually accessing a patient forum or an online support group where you're hearing from other people is the model that works for you. So you might have to do a little bit of shopping around to see what type of support fits with you as a person.
And I suppose as well, don't get disheartened by that process. That it's quite natural that not everything is going to suit you or fit you in that moment.
Absolutely.
But persevere and see, explore, and be open to it. I suppose that okay, this didn't work. Let's try something else. Yeah,
be open to it and be open within it. So you know, if something's not working, rather than just leaving, tell the person that, you know what, I'm not sure this is doing for me what I had hoped it would. So that you can then have a dialogue about it with them. Obviously, I'm thinking more about counseling and psychotherapy here. But no, I completely endorse what you said, Sarah, that persevere with it, because sometimes we can also feel like it's not helping when in the long term it might be. Because sometimes when we open up about feelings and emotions, it can feel more painful at first, but then it tends to even out and have rewards in the long term. Yeah. The final thing I'll say on that is, you know, your clinical nurse specialist, and every patient should have a clinical nurse specialist who's their care coordinator. They might have some suggestions of what model of support might be working for you. So if you've tried something and it's not working, then please do speak to them about it. They might have ideas on what else you might be able to try.
Of course.
Yeah.
That's our last question now. Unfortunately, we're starting to run out of time.
Sure.
We could spend all evening talking about this, but this last question is: I live alone and find it tough to cope at times, particularly during the pandemic, as I felt very isolated. What would you recommend I do?
This is such a tough one, and especially for people with a diagnosis like myeloma, you're sort of in that extra category of people who are shielding, perhaps, or even when things have started to open up, maybe you're feeling a little bit anxious and not ready to socialize. Just some quick suggestions I can make is, it's very helpful to know that you're feeling isolated. Sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is to acknowledge that we're feeling a little bit lonely, because it's not an easy thing to admit. Although every single one of us needs connection, there isn't a human being out there who doesn't. So just acknowledging that you're feeling lonely might help you think about what you can do. In the current, the way the world is at the moment, virtual contact in whatever form can be a good enough substitute when you can't have the real thing. So do reach out to people, even if it's by phone rather than video chat, if you're not very, comfortable with technology. Sometimes it's helpful to just go out and be in the world from a distance. So by which I mean things like, go for a walk, sit in a garden and people watch. Even doing that can make you feel like you're part of something for a moment, that you are part of the people who are in the park at that time, and you're just watching other people and the world go by. These kinds of things can really help. I guess it all boils down to just creating some ways of having a moment of connection with someone. Sometimes isolation can make us feel really low and take us to a really dark and lonely place. If that's happening, then it's very important to seek help and talk to maybe your GP or talk to your treating team. And you might need some counseling, if you're feeling particularly isolated and struggling a lot with those kind of feelings. Yeah.
No, that's really helpful. And I think as well, there's a lot of anxiety around, because people have been shielding, because it's really been driven home that they're part of the vulnerable group, that now as we're transitioning back into somewhat slow into normality, that can feel very, very worrying. So I think taking it slow at first, doing what you're comfortable, but trying up the frequency might be a good approach initially. and don't feel pressured by others. You know, what's best for you is what's best for you.
Absolutely. Completely endorse that.
That is perfect. Well, that is all we have time for in regards to our questions. Thanks again for everyone who sent in their questions. We're sorry that we were unable to get through them all, but we do hope that you've picked up some useful tips and hints, and even just to start the conversation in your own life about your psychological well-being. So I also wanted to highlight some of Myeloma UK's helpful resources that you might find helpful. So we have obviously our info line, which will speak to myself, my colleagues Kim, Ellen and Haley. We also have a wide range of patient information that you can find on our website, or you can also contact us and we can send it out hard copy. We have some interesting videos as well. This one will in time be added to that resource, so you can look back on this if you wanted to go over a particular topic that was brought up. We also have support groups. Again, some are virtual at the moment, but we hope as we continue to come out of lockdown that face-to-face might start to open up. But if you're interested in that, do get in contact with us. We can link you up with some support in your area. And also we have upcoming info days and digital sessions will continue with different topics. So do keep an eye out for that. There could be other things that you're interested in as well. And I think that's it. We also actually have a discussion forum on our website as well. So again, what you tapped into there, getting into the digital community might be a way to share your feelings and experiences. So that could be another useful resources for individuals. So yeah, I think overall, thank you so much, Sarabi. That was unreal. I really enjoyed it myself. And I think it's going to be such a good resource for everyone. So thank you so much
I
for your
hope
time.
so. You're very welcome.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.